hadn't planned to be downtown that night. The original plan was simple. Stay home, heat up some leftovers, maybe finally watch that documentary that had been sitting in my queue for weeks. Bella had told me she'd be out. Something about a birthday dinner for her friend Madison. Across town in North Park. All girls, casual, nothing to worry about. She kissed me goodbye at the door and said not to wait up. And for a while, I didn't question it. I even texted her a little joke. Something cheesy about surviving the quiet without her chatter. She responded with a heart emoji. That was it. But then, around 6, I got this feeling I can't explain. The kind that sits low in your stomach and refuses to leave. I told myself it was nothing, maybe indigestion. But even as I reached for the remote, something just didn't feel right. So I grabbed my keys. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't trying to catch her in anything. I just needed air. I told myself I'd find a place to eat by myself. Clear my head. Somewhere quiet. Downtown felt far enough from where she said she'd be, neutral ground. That's how I ended up on 5th Avenue. Standing in front of a little Italian place we used to like before life got busy and excuses became easier than effort. I made a reservation for one. The host led me to a small table near the back, half shielded by a pillar. It was perfect. Private. I didn't need much, just food, wine, and some space. But before the waiter even reached me with a menu, I saw her. Bella. She walked in through the front entrance, laughing. Not the polite laugh she reserved for acquaintances or forced dinner parties. This was full-bodied, relaxed. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. She looked beautiful. Stunning, actually. Hair curled the way she used to before date nights. That deep maroon dress I remembered from a vacation years ago. The one she once said was too revealing for dinner back home. Then I saw who she was with. Landon. My blood froze. She'd mentioned him a few times over the past year. He worked in marketing. Some project they'd collaborated on. Back then, her mentions were casual, just part of a story about work. But slowly, his name disappeared from her vocabulary altogether. I asked once, jokingly, "Hey, whatever happened to Landon?" She blinked, then shrugged. "Oh, he transferred to another department, I think." That was the last time she spoke his name. I never thought twice about it. Until now. They took a table near the window. She sat first. He pulled her chair out. She smiled at him in that way you only smile at someone when there's history. And maybe something more. His hand landed on hers across the table. She didn't pull away. I sat still, heart pounding. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic gasp. No immediate confrontation. I just watched. Not out of shock, but recognition. Like my body already knew this truth, and it was just now catching up to my brain. They ordered drinks. She sipped red wine, Cabernet probably. He leaned in, whispered something that made her laugh again. Her shoulders relaxed. They looked like they belonged to each other. I waited until she noticed me. Took a while. The lighting in the restaurant was soft, but I guess the energy shifted, or maybe she finally looked past her glass. Her eyes landed on mine. She froze. Her smile dropped. Her hand slipped from his. She said something to Landon, too quiet to hear. He turned slightly but didn't look long. Bella stood and made her way toward me, cautiously, like I was a fire she didn't know how to put out. "Elijah," she said, voice too light. "This is unexpected." I raised an eyebrow. That's all I could manage. My throat had gone dry. She slid into the seat across from me without asking. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. "I didn't think you'd be here," she added unnecessarily. "No," I said. "You said you'd be in North Park." Her face flushed. "I was going to be. Madison canceled last minute, and I ran into Landon. We were just talking. He's going through a rough patch." "You got all dressed up for a last-minute catch-up?" She blinked. "It's not what it looks like." I tilted my head. "Isn't it?" She looked around. "Can we not do this here?" "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I was here first." She looked down. "I didn't plan, Elijah. This isn't what you think." I leaned back in my chair, watching her twist her wedding ring. "Then tell me what I should think." She didn't answer. We sat in silence for a few beats. Behind her, Landon looked out the window, pretending not to notice. The waiter approached, hesitated, and then turned away. He knew something was off. Finally, I stood. "I'm not going to make a scene," I told her. "You don't have to explain anything. I already saw enough." Her lips parted like she wanted to stop me, but nothing came out. I didn't wait. I walked out, passing Landon on the way. He glanced at me, almost guilty, but didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The night air was cold when I stepped onto the sidewalk. I didn't look back. The drive home that night was a blur. Red lights, headlights, maybe a few honks I didn't register. I wasn't thinking about traffic laws or directions. I just drove. My hands were locked at 10 and 2, knuckles white, heart steady in that strange way it gets when emotion has gone past boiling and into numb. The silence inside the car was deafening. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had, calm, familiar, ours. But something inside had already changed. That image of her with Landon, her hand under his, that laugh. It looped in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just stood in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. That's when it started. Not a breakdown, not anger, but a quiet unraveling. Like pulling a thread on a sweater you thought was solid, only to realize it's coming apart in your hands. I began replaying everything. Started small. Months ago, maybe longer, Bella had become distant. Not cold, just unavailable in these subtle, careful ways. She used to greet me when I got home, sometimes even had music playing, dinner started. That disappeared gradually. At first I chalked it up to work stress. Her team had taken on new clients. She was under pressure. That was her go-to explanation. But there were more signs. She began stepping outside to take calls. Always friends from out of town or coworkers who needed a quick vent session. Her phone became a constant companion, glued to her hand like an extension of herself. She used to leave it on the counter when we watched movies. Now it stayed with her at dinner, on walks, even in the bathroom. Passwords changed. Not just on her phone, but on her laptop, too. When I asked, she said it was a company security policy. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. She started traveling more, little weekend conferences that popped up last minute. Sometimes I'd offer to go with her, make it a couple's trip. She always had a reason why that wouldn't work. "It's boring," she'd say. "Just workshops and bad coffee." I found a lighter in her car once. "We don't smoke." When I asked, she said it was probably Madison's. Another time, I noticed a shirt in the laundry. Definitely not mine. Wrong size, wrong brand. "A giveaway at work," she said. "Some promo thing." Even her scent changed. Bella has always worn this soft jasmine perfume. It was subtle, elegant. But a few times she came home smelling different, sharper, musky. I asked once and she shrugged it off. Must have rubbed off from someone at work. You know how elevators are. And then there was that night she left in jeans and a cardigan and came home in a black dress and heels. She said they'd gone somewhere nicer than planned, and she had something in her trunk from an earlier event. I didn't press her. I laughed, actually. Told her she looked beautiful. God, I wanted so badly to believe all of it. Every excuse. Every carefully planted misdirection. I told myself she'd never do that to me. That we were just in a rut. That life gets like this sometimes. But now it all felt like a blueprint. A carefully mapped out trail she had led me down, knowing I'd never think to look off the path. I sat on the edge of our bed that night and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't punch anything. I just sat there, remembering every little moment I'd overlooked. The way she started locking the bathroom door when she showered. The sudden uptick in new lingerie she claimed were sale finds. The weekends she needed to visit her sister, but came back with no stories to tell. It was all there. The signs. The evidence. Not loud or obvious, but real. Hidden in plain sight. I opened our nightstand drawer and pulled out the old journal Bella gave me years ago. It was a birthday gift. She'd written a note on the first page. "For all the thoughts you never say out loud." I flipped to a blank page and started writing. Not because I thought it would fix anything. I just needed to get it out. To make sense of how I'd gone from loving husband to someone sitting in the wreckage of his own marriage. I wrote about how I remembered the first time I saw her, brilliant, sarcastic, with that half-smile that said she knew something no one else did. I wrote about our first anniversary, how we danced in the living room because the restaurant reservation fell through. I wrote about how she used to reach for my hand in crowded rooms, like I was her anchor. And then I wrote about how she stopped, how those gestures faded, how her gaze became a thing that passed through me, not at me. When I closed the journal, the room felt heavier. Not because I'd uncovered anything new, but because I'd finally admitted it. Out loud, in ink. This wasn't sudden. It had been happening for a long time. I was just the last to see it. The next morning felt different. Not just emotionally, something physical shifted in the air. I didn't sleep much, maybe a couple hours at best. But I woke up alert, wired with a cold purpose. I wasn't chasing a suspicion anymore. I'd seen it, heard it, felt it. The betrayal had taken form. It had a name, a face, a voice I could now place to the silence between us. I stepped into my office to grab a notepad, thinking maybe I'd write again. But something was waiting for me on the desk. Plain white envelope. No name. No stamp, no return address. It hadn't been there the night before. I stared at it for a long moment, hesitant to touch it. Something about the way it sat there, centered perfectly straight, felt deliberate, like it was meant to be found, meant to be opened now and not a minute later. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, some printed in color, others in black and white. Most were grainy, taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. Bella and Landon, in a parking garage, in a hotel lobby, exiting a rooftop bar, sitting in a car together, faces close, too close. One *T showed her resting her head on his shoulder, eyes closed. Another had his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through a narrow alley between restaurants. In all of them, she looked relaxed, comfortable, *mate. The timestamps on the photos told the rest of the story. These weren't from one night, or one mistake. They spanned months, back as far as spring. While I was planning our anniversary weekend, she was somewhere else entirely. My hands trembled as I pulled out the second item from the envelope. Printed messages, emails, maybe texts, couldn't tell. But the font was uniform, like it had been extracted and compiled deliberately. No sender, no recipient listed. Just exchanges between two people who clearly knew each other well. First, it was small talk. Then flirtation. Then *Macy. One message read, "I wish I could wake up next to you instead of sneaking out before sunrise. With him it just feels dull. Like I'm trapped in a loop I never chose." Another, "You make me feel real. I don't have to pretend with you." And the worst one, "He's a good guy. Too good. But he's more of a roommate now. Comfortable but lifeless." My breath caught at that one. Lifeless. That's how she described me. The man who had stood beside her through her mother's surgery, through job layoffs, through sleepless nights and financial fears. Lifeless. I dropped the papers onto the desk and sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the photographs. I'd always thought betrayal would feel like a knife. Sharp, sudden, brutal. But this felt more like drowning in slow motion. Each image, each message was a weight, pulling me under just a little more. I thought back to all the nights I'd waited up for her. All the times I'd made her tea when she came home, exhausted from work. Every gentle kiss on her forehead when she said she had an early meeting. Every "I love you" that I now knew might have followed or preceded one sent to him. I thought about the dog-eared novel she said she was reading for a second time. She used to quote lines from it, told me she was in love with the writing. I found one of those quotes, word for word, in one of the messages to Landon. "I never knew how lonely I was until you made me feel seen." She'd never said that to me. I had no idea she felt unseen. But then again, maybe I wasn't the one she wanted to see her. I gathered the photos and printed pages, placing them back into the envelope with a strange reverence, like they were sacred. Not because they deserved respect, but because they were definitive. They were the final puzzle pieces I hadn't wanted but now couldn't deny. I sat back in my chair and stared out the window. The lawn was quiet. A few birds hopped across the fence. A jogger passed by with earbuds in, oblivious to the war happening inside the house he'd just run past. My phone buzzed. A text from Bella. Morning red heart meeting ran long. Call you after? The casual lie hit different now. I could almost hear her typing it with a smile, probably at Landon's place, or in some coffee shop where she thought I'd never show up. I didn't respond. Couldn't. There was nothing left to say, because for once, everything I needed to know had already been said. Documented, captured, dated and time-stamped. I spent the rest of the morning in silence. No music, no distractions. Just stillness. I think I needed to feel the weight of it. The collapse of a marriage doesn't happen all at once. It erodes, day by day, lie by lie. But sometimes the confirmation, the undeniable proof, feels like the final breath before the body gives up. That envelope had been a funeral notice. Not of a person, but of a life I thought we were living together. And now I was left with the burial. 3 days passed before Bella came home. Not that she'd been gone officially. We hadn't had the conversation yet, hadn't shouted or cried or broken anything dramatic. But in a way, that envelope on my desk had already done the breaking for both of us. I hadn't confronted her with it. I hadn't sent a single text or made a call. Just silence. The kind that says more than any argument could. When I heard her keys in the door that Friday afternoon, I was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The house was eerily clean. Not because I'd cleaned it, but because I'd cleared it. All her things, her shoes by the door, the cardigan she always left draped over the back of the couch, the makeup bag she never zipped, were gone. Not stolen. Packed. Carefully. I had folded everything and placed it in neat boxes, labeled with dates, bathroom, bedroom, closet. Her presence, once scattered everywhere, had been contained. When she stepped inside, her movements slowed. She noticed the emptiness instantly. Her gaze went to the shoe rack first, then to the now bare hooks on the wall. Her breath hitched, not dramatically, not loudly, but I heard it. Elijah, she said, closing the door softly behind her. I didn't respond. She walked into the living room cautiously, as though she wasn't sure what version of me she was going to find. I didn't stand. I didn't greet her. I just gestured toward the boxes stacked along the wall near the stairs. They're in order, I said flatly. She nodded slowly. Her face looked drawn, as if she hadn't slept much either. Her eyes were rimmed with redness, her hair tied back in a loose knot that didn't suit her usual precision. But there was no pity in me, not anymore. You packed my things, she said, more to herself than to me. You weren't here, I said. And I didn't want to keep waiting. She glanced around again, maybe hoping to find something of hers still hanging on, some proof that this wasn't final. But it was. Elijah, can we talk? I didn't say no. I just stood up and walked toward the kitchen. She followed. Not because she had a plan, but because she knew she had to. In the kitchen, she sat at the table like a guest. Hands clasped in her lap, staring at the wood grain like it held the words she couldn't form. I know what you saw, she began quietly. I don't want to lie anymore. I stayed silent. I wasn't going to say anything, she continued. I thought, if I ended it with him, maybe we could still, she stopped, swallowed. But then I saw your face that night, and I knew. That it was over? I asked. She flinched. That you deserved more than lies. I stared at her for a long moment. Why him? She hesitated. Because he saw me. He paid attention. He asked questions about things that didn't matter, like what kind of candle I liked, or if I'd ever been to Maine in the fall. Stupid things. But it made me feel, noticed. You could have asked me to see you, I said, more tired than angry. I did, she said quietly. But maybe not loud enough. Or maybe you stopped listening. We sat there in that fragile honesty for a while, two people staring at the ashes of something they'd once built together. There was no yelling, no throwing of plates, no slammed doors. Just sadness. And a clarity so cold it felt sterile. She stood and walked slowly through the house after that, touching the door frames, the bookshelf, the photo frame I turned face down. She didn't ask for any of it back. She just looked at it the way someone looks at a childhood bedroom right before moving out for good. The bedroom was the last stop. She lingered at the doorway. You changed the sheets, she said. I nodded. It didn't feel right to leave them. Even the dog Cooper, who used to go wild when she came home, barely lifted his head from the living room rug. He watched her from a distance as if confused or maybe just reflecting the shift he felt in the room. She noticed it too. Her shoulders dropped a little. "Are you going to tell people?" she asked. "I don't need to," I replied. "People notice when something dies, even if it's quiet." She bit her bottom lip, a habit I once found endearing. Now it just felt like something a stranger did. "I'll come back for the furniture later," she said. "If that's okay." I shrugged. "Whatever's left, I'll put in the garage." She nodded again, eyes glossy but refusing to cry. Maybe she already had. Maybe she'd run dry. She picked up the first box and headed for the door. As she passed me, she paused for just a second. "Elijah," she said, "I know saying sorry doesn't fix this, but I am. For everything." I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because no answer felt true. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. Not today. Maybe not ever. She left quietly. No slamming of the door, no last word. Just the sound of a box shifting in her arms and the creak of the floorboards as she crossed them for the last time. The door clicked shut behind her. That was it. No drama. No chaos. Just finality. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing. The silence didn't feel heavy or oppressive anymore. It didn't feel sad either. It just was. Like background noise you'd grown used to over time. Cooper came over, laid his head on my foot. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. "Good boy," I murmured. Outside, a car started. Inside, the storm had passed. 1 week. That's how long it took for the stillness to unravel. After Bella left, the house didn't just go quiet, it held its breath. I spent those first few days walking through it like a museum of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I changed passwords. Donated some of the furniture she'd promised to retrieve but never did. Bought new linens. Rearranged the kitchen drawers, not because I needed to, but because I needed anything to feel different. I was beginning to adjust. Then came the email. Subject line, urgent, request for response, internal ethics review. At first, I thought it was spam. But the sender was legitimate. It was from HR at my company. An official notice of a misconduct claim filed against me. The words blurred as I read them, but the phrases jumped out: allegations of inappropriate behavior, hostile communication, possible breach of policy. It was surreal. Unbelievable. Then I got to the body of the complaint. It didn't name Bella directly, but the phrasing, the tone, the specific word choices, they were hers. I knew them the same way you recognize a song from the first note. The complaint accused me of retaliating against her after our separation. Of making threats. Of creating an unsafe emotional environment for her while she was navigating professional obligations connected to our social circle. It implied that I had tried to damage her relationships with mutual acquaintances and jeopardize her standing in the community. I sat at my desk, jaw locked, staring at the screen. The woman who had slipped out of my life barely a week ago was now trying to fracture what was left of it from a distance. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was sabotage. And it wasn't just about hurting me. It was strategic. Deliberate. Designed to isolate me, to make me look unstable or vindictive. To muddy the waters just enough so that if anyone asked what happened, she could shrug and say, "It's complicated," with a knowing look that hinted I was the problem all along. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Then I sat back and waited. The investigation was swift but not painless. HR pulled me in for a preliminary interview the next day. I sat across from a legal representative and a compliance officer, answering questions I never imagined I'd be asked. Had I contacted Bella's employer? No. Had I sent threatening messages? No. Had I attempted to damage her reputation with mutual friends or colleagues? No. I was calm, collected, professional, because I knew if I showed even a flicker of the anger boiling under my skin, it could be twisted, used. I brought copies of the envelope she never knew I had, the photographs, the messages, the timeline. My attorney presented them to the board without emotion, just facts. Cold and clean. She hadn't just broken a marriage. She'd built a second life, and now that I had exposed it, she was scrambling to rewrite the narrative. Bella had always been articulate, persuasive. She knew how to walk into a room and make people lean in when she spoke. But that SK*LL was now her WE*P*N. Her complaint read like something curated, designed for maximum ambiguity. Not quite lies, but distortions carefully constructed to sound credible, to make doubt feel reasonable. But I wasn't without allies. Coworkers came forward, people who had seen me during those weeks, who had noticed how withdrawn I'd become but never once heard me speak ill of her. A few even admitted Bella had been distant for months before the separation, hinting at personal struggles but never clarifying. Some remembered her bringing Landon to a networking event once, downplaying it as a work thing. That detail didn't go unnoticed. Piece by piece, the complaint unraveled. By the end of the week, HR cleared me of any wrongdoing. The email came late Friday evening. One line, after review, no action will be taken. The matter is considered closed. I stared at it for a long time. No action taken. Case closed. But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like survival. That night, I stood at the sink doing dishes and I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not about what we were, but about who she had become. The same woman who once cried when I surprised her with a handwritten note had now tried to dismantle the rest of my life from behind a keyboard. The realization wasn't just painful, it was disorienting. I had been married to a stranger. I wondered if Landon knew who she really was, if he'd seen that side of her yet, or if he was still under the spell, the early version, the curated charm. I wondered if one day he'd open an inbox and find the same kind of bomb waiting for him. Maybe not. Maybe I was the only enemy she needed. A friend of mine, Sam, called that weekend to check in. He worked in corporate law and had heard whispers about the investigation through mutual contacts. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said. "You know she's not done, right?" "I figured. She plays long games," he said. "She wants to win the breakup." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "She already lost. That's why she's fighting." He didn't argue. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a run. No music, just the sound of my feet hitting the pavement. I pushed hard, past the familiar houses, past the neighborhood coffee shop we used to go to, past everything. When I finally stopped, lungs burning, sweat pouring, I stood on a hill that overlooked the city. It was quiet. I could breathe. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like prey. She had tried to ruin me. She failed. And something in me clicked. I wasn't going to spend the rest of the story playing defense. She came back on a Tuesday. I wasn't expecting her. There'd been no texts, no calls. Just the doorbell, 2 short rings. When I opened it, Bella stood there. No makeup, no pretense. Just tired eyes and a laptop clutched to her chest like a shield. "I'm not here to fight," she said quietly. I didn't answer, just stepped aside. She walked in like someone who'd forgotten the house's rhythm. Hesitant, detached. Even Cooper barely lifted his head from the couch. "I came to make it right," she said. She sat at the kitchen table and opened the laptop. No monologue, no begging. Just silence, as she clicked through files, opened emails, selected screensh *TS. She'd logged into her own accounts. Social, work, even a burner I hadn't known existed. She deleted things, archived others. Then she opened a formal document. A signed statement addressed to my company, retracting every word of her complaint. "I sent this already," she said. "I didn't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to leave it like that." I watched her, trying to remember if this was the same person I married. She looked older than she had just a few weeks ago. Worn down. Honest, for once. "I crossed lines," she admitted. "I tried to control the fallout. I wasn't trying to ruin you. I was trying to protect the version of myself that wasn't ready to admit I lost." I still didn't speak. Not because I was punishing her. Because there was nothing left to say. When she finished, she closed the laptop and sat back. "Are we even?" she asked, her voice almost gone. I looked at her for a long moment. "No one wins," I said. "That's the truth." She nodded, eyes shining. Then she stood, slowly, and walked to the door. She didn't ask for another chance. She didn't look back. She left without being a wife or even an ex. Just a memory. The house was mine again. Not just physically, but spiritually. Her energy had left it. The tension, the echoes, the questions, they all faded with time. I changed the locks, repainted the guest room, replaced the sheets, threw away the mug that said his and donated the matching one. Even the scent of her perfume was gone. Work returned to normal. No more questions, no more whispers. The HR incident faded into a forgotten folder somewhere. I was still standing. Cooper stayed close. More loyal than I deserved. The silence in the house wasn't hollow anymore. It was clean. like a white sheet waiting to be written on again. Lauren from next door started checking in. She'd always been kind, helped with our mail when we were out of town. She wasn't prying, wasn't flirting, just present. We talked at the fence sometimes, shared coffee once on the porch. I didn't expect anything from it. That was the point. One evening, I found the journal Bella gave me. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. Wrote one line. You can lose everything and still come back to yourself. I wrote every day after that. Not about her. About me. About who I was before all this and who I wanted to be now. And little by little, I remembered. Not the husband. Not the victim. Just Elijah. Still here. Still whole.